Welcome to the Talent Development Hot Seat podcast. I am your host, Andy Storch. I'm excited you're joining me today for another great episode and conversation to help you up your game and improve your capabilities in the world of talent development. And today we're talking about something interesting. We're going to dive into the topic of creativity and artistry and as it connects to business and leadership. My guest today is Nir Hindie, who is an international keynote speaker specializing in creativity and leadership. He champions what he calls business artistry, a mindset that fuses business strategy with artistic intuition, creativity, and human connection. As the founder of the Arshan, Nir partners with global companies like Google, SAP, and TikTok to bridge the gap between humanities and technology, helping build organizations that are both high-performing and deeply human. He's an adjunct professor at IE Business School in Madrid and a mentor at Harvard and MIT, and he shapes the next generation of creative leaders by bringing real-world insights into academia. Nir's expertise has earned him recognition among Spain's 100 experts on innovation and membership in the World Economic Forum's Cultural Leaders Network. And a side personal note, Nir is an expat like me living in Spain. He's originally from Israel, now living in Madrid. We got connected through friends a couple of years ago. He's been a member of the talent development think tank community for a while and even attended our last conference in Orlando in November. Nir, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much. I always say that with this kind of introduction, the person in the world that will be very proud is my mom. So I always do this for my mom. So
I love
thank
that.
you for having me.
I hope your mom listens. If she does, hi, Mom. Good to talk with you. Nir, really great. We've had some really cool conversations, both at the conference, in our community. I know you've been doing some really interesting things, primarily a lot with entrepreneurs and startups and smaller organizations, but I know you've worked with some larger organizations as well. You have worked with a lot of leaders, and you've really been honing in on this theory around creativity and artistry in business and leadership, which I'm excited to dive into. But let's take a step back. How did you get into this space to begin with? Where did all this come from?
I think I always say that it's kind of a result of a frustrated kids. From very young age, I really loved the arts, the architecture, fashion, photography, but I really loved technology and business. But the education system channel you to choose. What are you? Left brain, right brain, creative, analytic. So in my 20s, even though I kind of been in the entrepreneurial world, study economics and web technologies, and engaged a lot with artists. And I started to notice that they think in a similar way to entrepreneurs. And that kind of set me on a journey to try to understand how art influences business, because it's very obvious how business influences art. And I think that the biggest kind of realization that I had is that we tend to think that art is an object. But art is not an object. Art is a mindset, as my shirt actually shows. I mean, the object is just the end result of a thinking process. And when I started to kind of really dive into it, I realized that if you think about art as a way of thinking and what this space invites, you see how it can actually impact the world of business.
And art is one of those things it's in the eye of the beholder to begin with, right? Like when you hear art, the word art, a lot of people, myself included, probably picture a picture, right? A painting on a wall, but obviously it can be performing arts. It can be, drawing, painting, but it can also be anything that you create. Like, are we creating art right now?
Yeah. I mean, I'll give you an example because you just tapped into one kind of my second lesson when I dive into art is that we tend to think that art is an object, but it's actually a mindset. But the second thing that I learned is that the moment you tell someone an art, immediately they think about painting, but paint is a medium. Yep. And because my personal interest in technology, I realized that artists actually work with technology, and technology is a medium as well. And that's where I think that kind of those things started to merge, because the moment you understand that art is a mindset and technology is a medium for creative expression, you start to see what artists doing with technology, and you will see technological innovation. And I'll give you one concrete example, maybe even more, if you would like. But we all know the concept of projection mapping, what we might call, even as an example, Google Earth, okay, or Google Street View. Google Street View. This kind of an idea was created in 1978 by a group of artists and engineers in MIT. And they took a whole city, Aspen, Colorado, and they mapped the whole city in 1978. And that's 30 years before the Google Street View. Now,
Right.
I can give you many more examples for technological innovations that we are using today without knowing that it's actually started as an artistic project.
Hmm. So let's talk about this idea of art is a mindset. You've got the shirt on. A lot of people listening might be thinking, okay, well, I'm interested in business. I'm interested in talent development, developing people. I might like a little bit of art on the side, but how does having a mindset of art going to help me in my career in business and developing people?
So it's a great question. I think it's important to understand that what maybe an art kind of way of thinking invites. And oftentimes we tend to associate immediately art with creativity, and that's true. But art, it's not only about creativity. Very often it's about a mindset of exploration. Artists are much more exploration oriented for that matter. Not only, it's not to say that they are not execution oriented, but there is also a balance of exploration. There is also a balance of, for that matter, art is about evoking emotions. Now, when you start to connect those two, you realize that's what you want from your leaders, especially in certain areas in the organization. If you want innovation, you need to have people that actually are much more open for exploration, much more open for experimentation, much more driven for trial and error. And when you think about it that way, you start to see that actually art invites this way of thinking in the areas that are important to many companies, which are the creativity and innovation. Now, I can obviously dive if later also why I also think it's a skill set that we can develop and hone, and maybe that's over here where we can speak some of the work that I do.
Okay.
So I think it's important to understand that when you think about art, is that you have to understand the difference between the art and business. Business is about error reduction, cost reduction, efficiency, productivity. Art is about evoking emotion, storytelling, inspiration, experimentation. And I think good leaders, and in a second I can connect it to leadership,
Yeah.
are the one that able to adopt both,
Okay.
or at least cultivate it.
I'm glad you mentioned that. I was going to ask you about leadership next because I know that you work on and subscribe to a theory you call creative leadership. And I'm curious, what do you think leaders need to know about creativity? Why is that important for leadership?
So I will take it even one step further with your permission, because I think your audience heard a lot about creativity and leadership. I want to speak about why I think it's artistry is what's important.
Okay.
And I will give you a concrete example. You know, when I started to dive into this kind of intersection of art and business, and I mentioned one angle of my work, how artists can drive technological innovation and what we can learn from them. But I started to ask myself, you know, what made, for that matter, that was my, I would say, starting point. What made Apple and Steve Jobs so creative in a way, and so mindful of this approach? And when I started to notice is that we tend to focus on Steve Jobs, but he had a lot of influences. Dr. Edwin Land at Polaroid, Dr. Ervin Brown at Brown, Walt Disney at Disney. And when I started to research these figures, I started to notice to all of them had this connection and passion for the arts. They actually understood that art is the gravitational power that combines business, technology, and consumers. And they looked at business as a medium for creative expression. Now, when I started to ask myself, what is this leadership skills that they bring into their companies, I started to decode how they actually do it. And that's one of the things that I started to teach in some of the work that I do. And I'll be happy to dive to some of the lessons that I learned from them, from a mindset, from how they do it in organizations, and then a skill set.
Yeah, let's talk about that because you've studied some of this and I'm still curious. Okay, Steve Jobs, obviously very famous for the work that he did, but it's easy to say, well, none of us are Steve Jobs. We do have, thousands of leaders across different companies, and we want them to be more effective in what they do, connect more with the people they work with, and maybe more creative and more innovative as well. So how do these ideas, uh, how do we see them work in real life inside the companies that we work in?
So I'll give you a few examples. Let me
Okay.
try to unpack it. First of all, one of the things that I realized is that when I looked at Jobs and Irving Brown at Brown and Walt Disney, etc., I've noticed few things. Let's start with one example. One of the things that leaders tend to do is that the higher they go in the ladder, the more they start to distance themselves from the creative process. They actually start to delegate it. But if you will see Steve Jobs, Walt Disney, Irving Brown, Ed Catmull, all these people understood is that the higher they go in the organization, the more they need to be involved in the creative process, not to micromanage it, but to protect it from the bureaucracy of the organization. They became the defender of the creative departments. And they are the one that's set to make sure that these people have direct access to them. One of the changes that Steve Jobs did, if I'll use him as an example, he made the design department where all the creative idea came from under him directly. In many organizations, design is a function of engineering or operation. But one thing that I saw is that these people make sure to protect the creative process. And one question that I like to ask leaders is that when was the last time you met your creative team or your creative department? I don't want to call it specifically design. Oftentimes I will hear, yeah, once a year. These leaders met their creative teams on a weekly basis, if not daily.
Yeah.
That's one single example. Now, the moment you meet your creative teams on a daily or weekly basis, it's much easier to first protect, to guide them, to try to understand where they are going, etc. Now, I'll give you another kind of example that I saw when it comes to this type of what I call this business artistry or this type of leadership. Just yesterday, I had the chance to interview Mickey Drexler, who was the legendary CEO of Gap. Okay. He led Gap in the 90s. We are same age for me, growing in Israel. Back in the 90s, Gap was it symbolized America. It was cool. It was relevant. It was culture. It was much more than fashion. And Mickey is the guy that led it. And just to kind of anecdote, I will add over here, he's the one that Steve Jobs brought to the board of Apple to help him design the Apple stores that we know today. But let me tell you an example one thing that I have noticed, and yesterday I discussed it with Mickey. One of the things that he always says that he's a proud micromanager. Now, if you went to a business school, if you've been to a leadership training, you know that micromanagement is wrong.
It's the worst thing. It's what everybody hates.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But when we started to dive into what exactly he's doing, you realize that Mickey doesn't, for that matter, micromanage people. He micromanage the customer experience. And when you look at Steve Jobs and Mickey Drexler and Walt Disney and Ed Catmull and for that matter, Irving Brown, the same people, they were obsessed to make sure that customer will get the best and most beneficial experience. And they model it to their teams. So they were into the details in order to make sure that the experience will be breathtaking. Because one of the things they realize is that if the top management won't model this behavior, looking into the details and showing care, nobody will do it in the organization. So these are kind of just two examples. Protect the creative process. Micromanage the experience, not the people. Model the best user experience you want your customer to have so everyone can learn from.
I think that there's a lot to be learned there. And also these examples strike me as coming from organizations where design and the customer experience is incredibly important. Not that it's not important everywhere, but Apple is sort of like the extreme. And Steve Jobs, I think, is known as being the extreme, a genius and someone who got away with micromanaging. In fact, I remember I interviewed Liz Weissman, the author of Multipliers, years ago, and asked her about Steve Jobs, and she saw him almost as an exception to some of her own research on how leaders multiply their people's intelligence because he was such a micromanager. But I think he also probably did it in a way that people appreciated the opportunity to be there and to learn from him and knew that it was about the perfection of the design and the process. For everyday leaders, you talk about the importance of being connected to the creativity and the things that are happening. I think that is important. At the same time, we talk about leadership. A lot of people will say, well, to truly become a great leader, you need to be good at delegating or moving yourself from the day-to-day work and just focus on enabling people to succeed and trust them to get the job done. But what you're saying is that may be true, but you also still need to really kind of have your hands in things or understand what's going on with the creative process so that you can remain creative and innovative yourself.
And make sure that the bureaucrats in the organization won't kill it. Because oftentimes you need a champion of this way of thinking. You need a champion for the creative people. You need a champion for new ideas. One of the things that I like to do in my keynotes and workshop is that I like to show a video from the movie Ratatouille. Now, I guess that many people saw this movie, but there is one part that people kind of watch and tend to forget. And it's the end of the movie. The critic say kind of a speech about after experience the dinner. And what he says is that the new need friends, because he speaks about how easy it is to criticize new ideas, but actually the new need friends. And I think a role of a leader is to be this friend, and you need to model this behavior. So, maybe at the beginning, you are the one that micromanage the experience, but you hire great people and they learn what is important, what to pay attention to, and they start to model it. Because oftentimes, how many great ideas you have been killed because of corporate politics or being stayed on the floor because marketing said we cannot make money out of it. But that's the role of innovation. Oftentimes, you need to bring something new that the market haven't seen.
Yep. How do you balance this idea of quote unquote micromanaging the creativity or being really involved in the creativity and also encouraging a growth mindset and encouraging people to try different things so that innovation and creativity exists?
Listen, I think you can set the vision. You can say, for example, okay, I want to have fast browser in our operating system. I don't need to come and tell you, Andy, I want you to do 3 regression tests. I don't want to tell you. I want to tell you what the vision is. Fast Explorer that everyone can use, less than whatever. From now on, that's you. It's what we can call maybe one of the Apple employee defined it very nice. He said it's like top-down leadership, bottom-up contribution. So you set the vision, but you let the people actually achieve it in their own way. But you are the one that all the time set the vision and protecting it. It's so easy to get distracted from the vision when you have finance telling you that you cannot do things. Or the marketing tell you that we cannot sell it. But oftentimes the thing about the data, and that's something that I think it's important to understand, data is not creative. Data is looking back to the past. And I think that my work is kind of relevant if you're thinking about pushing creativity and innovation. And I think one of the important lessons leaders need to understand is that you cannot have innovation without creativity. That's why you need to foster this mindset. Then hopefully you will have the tools to get the innovation, because I'm positive that many of your listeners did design thinking workshop or they did agile development.
Yep, I've done it.
All of them got the same result? Not necessarily, because I think those are great methodologies, but if you don't have the mindset and the skill set, will the methodology will help? I'm not sure.
I was going to ask you if there's a difference between design thinking, which I think many of our listeners might be familiar with. I've gone through and led some design thinking workshops. I love the concept. Between that and what you call art thinking or creative thinking, is there a difference there? Is it similar?
100%. 100%. And everyone I've been asked. Let me tell you a concrete example. One of the first basic, and it's easy because you're already familiar with that. One of the basic things you need to do in design thinking, the first stage is that you need to go outside and observe your clients. Now pay attention. And this is where I think art is also a skill set. Nobody teach you how to observe. The assumption is that you know how to observe.
Right.
The assumption is that you have eyes, so you see. And over here, this is where I use art in a different way. If you think about it, art, visual art specifically, before the word visual, before you even can say something, you need to use your eye really and observe what is it that you see. Then try to unpack what is it that you see. And in my workshops, for that matter, or in the work that I do, I will add kind of an image on the screen, and I will ask people, what do you see? And it's incredible that people looking at the same photo and see different things. Mm-hmm. And it's proven that art can improve your observation skills. So I think that art thinking, for that matter, train you, first of all, for the mental models and the skill set you need. You learn how to observe. You practice your eyes so they are able to see things. And then you can go outside and observe clients. And then we can say the same about asking questions. People think that asking questions is easy. No, questioning is a skill that you need to develop. And here is the difference for me between art and design. Art is about formulating questions. Design is about solving them and answering them. And that's why I think we need both. It's not to say that art thinking is better than design thinking. I think we need both.
We need both. We need to learn how to observe and ask good questions as well as come up with great ideas.
Exactly. And I think over here, that's why I think art can teach us a lot, and artists, because artists are like, kind of, they go in the world like detectives and try to highlight and spotlight things that we are missing.
Mm-hmm. It makes sense. So our audience, let me start that over. I'm curious how you see all this connecting back to learning and development or talent development. Obviously, our listeners are working in that space and thinking about how to enable and empower their leaders to be more successful, to build better leadership development programs, develop better leaders as well as employees, whether it be in leadership development, career development, or something else. I think you've created a course on this. How do you connect this to learning and development, and how L&D can support more creative and artist thinking inside of organizations?
Listen, over here, I think I don't think there is one answer. I will tell you what I try to do. So yeah, I'm working with with the Fortune 500 companies, one of my biggest clients. And one of the things that we have been doing is that specifically targeting the rotational management program, the new leadership, because the young generation understand immediately what I'm talking about. Is that, and they seek it. Oftentimes, organizations that will have creative culture will also, I believe, will have a benefit in attracting talent. Okay, I believe that creativity can be a competitive advantage when it comes to attracting talent. Now, the way we did it, we actually I try to expose them, first of all, to these mental ideas that I just mentioned to you. Even you need to protect the creative process, and kind of trying by first mental models that creative leaders actually have. And I gave you one. I gave you now another one about micromanage the experience, not the people. So first we start with kind of exposing them to these mental models so they will know what makes a creative leader a creative leader. The second part is to take the skills that I just mentioned to you, and we actually running this skills workshop, whether it is virtually or on site, and then they might go and get a task to go and do it. And then another thing that we discuss is that how actually you can introduce new ideas in the organization. Because as I mentioned to you, I think that we need to grow this young leadership to be the defender of new ideas, or at least not to rush and kill them. To say, you know what, I don't understand what Andy just said.
Right.
But before I kill it, let's try to think it together.
Mm-hmm.
So it's much more kind of invitation to adopt different mental models, develop the skill set that they will need going forward, and then kind of understand what will be their role when they will come, or their employees will come to them with new ideas. So it's really focused on the stages of creativity and innovation. And I can give you an example from Pixar, how actually lack of, for that matter, awareness or observation killed the flow of ideas in the company. You want me to give you an example?
I would love an example here. Please give it to us.
So one of the famous kind of story that Pixar has is that they had a table in the long table, their meeting room. Now, oftentimes what happened in a meeting room, you have assigned roles. And oftentimes in the center of the table sit the CEO. And next to it, the next important person, etc., etc. What happened slowly at Pixar is that the people with the that are not close to leadership sat outside the table or at the end. What happened is that they were missing the ideas that might come from someone that just joined the company. And they have a strong and firm belief that great ideas can come from everywhere.
Yeah.
It's not linked to your hierarchy. And when they start to understand, they try to realize why they don't see or hear all these voices. They actually realize the shape of the table was wrong. So they change it to a square one. And even when they changed it to square one, it still didn't work. Why? Because people still kept their names. So what they did, they eliminate also the names. And then what you got is a table that everyone can sit anywhere they want in every meeting. And it created a different dynamic on discussion around new ideas. But you need to be a leader like Ed Catmull that asks himself questions, that ask himself, where is my blind spot? How can it be that I hear the same people all the time?
Yeah. I remember hearing a suggestion years ago. I interviewed a friend of mine named Larry Yacht, who's a retired Navy SEAL officer. And he said something that really stuck with me on this, that when they were doing debriefs after missions, they always insisted the lowest ranking person speak first so that you prevent
Yeah,
the most senior person in the room sharing their thoughts and then everyone else is going, oh, I agree with that, because they don't want to disagree. They always have
exactly.
the lowest ranking person speak first because they know, even though we think of the US Navy as being very hierarchical, that some of the best input, feedback, ideas are going to come from the quote lowest ranking people in the room and not just the senior officers.
Exactly. That's one of the lessons that we are talking in the program that we developed, how to run more effective kind of, for that matter, ideation, because we tend to think that brainstorming is the way, but the scientific research showed that brainstorming doesn't work. Because just one thing, you just gave one example, that the moment the boss says the idea, that's it. The whole room will align to the boss
Right.
because nobody wants to disagree.
Right.
So how do you actually change this dynamic? So one of the things that we did is that we exposed them to mental models. We helped them develop the skills, but we also gave them tools, how they can actually implement it. And I think it's something that needs to be repetitive. That's another maybe kind of a message to your audience. Don't do it once a year, 2 hours ideation workshop. It doesn't work that way. You need to cultivate it on a regular basis. Do it once a month if you cannot do it once a week, but don't do it once a year, 2 hours. From 2 hours once a week, once a year, you won't get creative teams.
Right. It needs to be more embedded in a lot of the work that you do. You
Exactly.
mentioned somewhere in there the word skill set, and you told us you promised in the beginning we could come back, or you mentioned we could come back to this idea of building a skill set of art and innovation. How do we think about doing that?
Yeah, so listen, I think that for me, the skill set is kind of tapping into what I just mentioned. It's observation, questioning, is how to run better ideation, etc. The thing is that there is this kind of notion, especially I see it also in the startup world, is that ideas are worthless, execution is everything. And I tend to disagree with this idea because I think that if you execute the wrong idea, you spend so much time, etc. So if you think about it at the top of the funnel, the better ideas you will get, most likely at the execution level, you will have better results. So we also need to kind of think that ideas are not easy. They are hard. They are just different hard from execution. And that's something we also need to cultivate. And that's why I'm positive that some of your colleagues and your listeners entering to the room with their team and asking them to come up with ideas to solve whatever challenge it is, and that they leave the room and ask themselves, what the hell was that? I mean, nobody can come up with a good idea, one good
Yeah.
idea. And they won't come with a good idea because you have to understand that you need to allow them to cultivate it, and you need a lot of bad ideas in order to get a good one.
Yeah, absolutely. I found that to be usually the case. And if you look throughout history of some of the biggest innovations, they came at the end of trying 50 or 1,000 other things before they got to the
Exactly.
thing that we know today, right? And the best innovators and inventors know that you've got to have that kind of growth mindset and be willing to try and fail a bunch of times before you get to the best solution.
Exactly. I mean, it's like also these people, I think that if we'll go a bit to hiring, I don't know if it's relevant, but I always, one of the example I like to give is that Brown, the electric appliance companies, this was like one of the most innovative companies that influenced Apple that we know today, but they did it in the 50s, 60s, 70s. And the head of a product department was a theater and art graduate. And the owner of the company understood that it's not about technology only, because so oftentimes, I'll tell you this. Oftentimes, we tend to think that technology is the solution for everything. But if you get the human story wrong, there is no amount of technological excellence that will save you. Technology always changing and developing. So you need to make sure that you get the human story right. And over here, in order to get the human story right, you need people that are connected to the emotional part of things. I don't know about you, but I just cannot throw my Apple product. And, I don't know, your listeners cannot see, but I'm
Ooh,
showing Andy
iPod.
my first iPod from 2003. It stopped working many years ago, but for me, this is a human artifact. It's
Yeah.
not a technological object.
Mm.
How do you get to this type of emotional connection? You have to understand what motivates people. And in order to motivate people, it's not Excel sheet.
Right. That's very interesting. Okay. The last thing I want to ask you about, Nir, is the concept of storytelling. I know that you're big on this as well.
Yeah.
Many people come up with great ideas. There's things they want to implement inside organizations, whether it be from L&D or leaders across different lines. And one of the most important factors in being able to sell their ideas or implement their ideas or influence others is being able to tell a good story, right? Can you talk about the
Yeah.
importance of storytelling in business artistry?
Yeah. So I'll give a context to your kind of listeners. So I've been doing a lot of work around storytelling, specifically from with the startups. So I've been doing the storytelling coaching in the Harvard Innovation Labs and MIT, etc. And what's we need to remember about startups and why I think storytelling is important to them and why it's relevant for organization is that startup oftentimes will bring new ideas to the world. So they have to use story to engage people. And I think that's why business people have, or people in organization have a lot what to learn from this startup mentality. And I'll tell you one mistake that founders do, and we as humans do. Oftentimes, when I will have an idea, immediately I will come and tell you, Andy, I thought about this and this idea. Now, immediately, oftentimes we will shut down because ideas per se are not important. One
Mm.
of the things that I found very relevant is that I will start, for that matter, with the story and then the problem. And I would say, listen, Andy, one of the things that drove me crazy in the last few years is that I always thought about myself as a micromanager. And the problem with micromanagement is, but then, and then I can give you my idea.
Mm-hmm.
But the moment I can tell you a problem that you might resonate with, it might create immediately the emotional hook.
Yeah.
So this is kind of one of the things that I try to do with startups, because at the end, you have the same structure. And I did a lot of work with TikTok around it. Even in sales, you enter to the room and you sell your product. Nobody care about the product.
Right.
The client want to hear about their problem and
Right.
then how your product going to answer.
Yeah.
And I think that one of the things that I try to shift the mindset around the infrastructure or the
Mm.
skeleton of how you should start the story. Start with the problem. You
Start
can
with the
build a
problem.
story around the problem and then come to the solution.
Yeah.
Oftentimes we enter to the room, our company is the market leader in SaaS, whatever, and our solutions help thousands of customers. You already lost me in our solution.
Right. What does it have to do with me? Is the question people
Exactly.
are asking in their minds, right? What does it have to
But
do
if
with
you
me?
come, but if you come and tell me, Nir, I know how difficult it is to get in touch with L&D because I was at your place. And one of the problems that I noticed is that ABC.
Mm-hmm.
That's why we came up with this and this way. Okay, you
Right.
already kind of, now I'm willing to listen more. Doesn't
Yeah.
mean that the story ends at the beginning. You need to be able to tell story in each part of it.
Right.
And I think that, we need to also teach our teams to tell a story, you
Agree.
know?
Well, you have shared some great stories with us today,
I hope so.
some great insights on this idea of leadership in artistic leadership. What do you call it in
I call
artistry
it
leadership?
business
Business
artistry,
artistry.
It's
Okay.
and there is two angles for it. The artist is technological innovation and leaders that are much more artful than just
Mm.
efficient.
Leaders who are more artful. Yeah, I love this. I think that it's something that a lot of people don't think about, and yet there's so much creativity to be unlocked in our organizations, in our economy, in our world, by taking more of an artistic view, a creative view, and of course, adopting more of a growth mindset, which is something I've been pushing a lot as well in the work that I do in organizations that I work with. Nir, this has been awesome. I'm looking forward to talking with you more. For people that want to get in touch with you or work with you, where's the best place for them to go?
I think LinkedIn. That's the easiest. Near Hindie, LinkedIn, or if they want to get exposed to my idea, my Substack, my weekly newsletter around business artistry. Just type on Google business artistry, and you will get my LinkedIn, my podcast, my Substack.
All right, business artistry. I like it. And LinkedIn, where we're both creating content on a
Yes.
regular basis. So make sure you come connect with us there. Nir, this has been awesome. Always enjoy talking with you and look forward to talking with you more in the future.
Thank you, Andy.